Every year around the holidays, I like to run a tabletop RPG with my family. One year it was a murder mystery D&D game inspired by Knives Out. Another year it was Capybara Capers, a one-page RPG about being capybaras trying to heist a huge, delicious lemon. This year, however, I was in a bookstore and came across Alice is Missing. It caught my eye because I'd watched Quinn's review of the game on the board game channel Shut Up and Sit Down and thought it sounded right up my alley. And for better or worse, it was one of the most immersive gaming experiences I've ever had. Alice is Missing is a silent tabletop RPG where everyone sits around on their phones and texts each other, playing teenagers looking for their missing friend Alice. I was intrigued by the concept of this game right from the start for a few reasons. One reason is that it was a one-shot in a box that I could play alongside the other people playing with me. That's really unique since normally I'm the person that needs to do all the prep and planning for running the game. 2, it was a silent role-playing game that was played by texting, which was super interesting, and I wanted to see how that would play out. 3rd was the concept and the tone. I'm a fan for the inspirations that the game's manual actually acknowledges. Life is Strange, Gone Home, Oxenfree. It even calls out Riverdale as an inspiration, but since I don't know the triumphs and defeats, the epic highs and lows of high school football, I wouldn't know anything about that. I was more of a Teen Wolf guy. Let me give you a quick review of my experience, because if you think it sounds cool and want to run it, I think it could be helpful. First, my impression that I would have to do no prep to play this game was both correct and incorrect. Cracking the box open and reading the manual, I realized that as the owner of the game, I'd have to play a quasi-game master type role just to get the game going before settling into my pre-assigned role as one of the characters. It makes sense, someone has to have all the rules down and explain the game, print off the character sheets and the missing person poster, but for some reason, I was taken aback by that. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with how the game actually handled that, but I didn't go in with the right expectation from a boxed game like this. So I wanted to warn you ahead of time that if you pick up the game, make sure you give yourself ample time to read through the manual and set up the game how the manual tells you to. This includes setting up all the game's cards and pieces, printing out all the materials, setting up the game's timer on a YouTube video that also has the game's soundtrack on it, which is actually amazing, and also grabbing a flashlight. I'd recommend about 2 to 2.5 hours for all of this. Now, when you actually sit down to play the gameplay is divided into 3 parts. Part 1 is setup, Part 2 is the 90 minutes of gameplay, and Part 3 is the come down. In Part 1, you explain the rules, choose your characters, generate relationships, and set up the group chat. You also create stories around the suspects and locations that Alice may be affected by. One important thing that the manual spends a good amount of time on is establishing safety tools and giving content warnings. So, if I'm being honest, before playing Alice is Missing, I didn't care that much about safety tools in RPGs. It's not that I thought they were useless or a bad idea, but honestly, I just felt awkward bringing them up with my groups. I nearly exclusively play TTRPGs with my friends and family, people that I've known for years and trust implicitly. I hadn't really considered it a risk that anyone would do something or something would happen in a game that anyone would be uncomfortable with. So for many of my home games, I'd either breeze past safety tools or just skip talking about them entirely. But because Alice is Missing is a carefully curated experience, I didn't want to skip or miss anything. So I ran through all the safety tools and content warnings that the game tells you to, and ran the debrief section at the end, where people can talk about how the game felt for them. And wow. I've tackled difficult themes in my games before, but I think because my games tend to happen in fantasy worlds, there's a degree of separation that Alice is Missing just does not have. Alice is Missing is a game that uses real-world scenarios, using the real-world mediums that the characters in the story would actually be using. There's just no degree of separation there. In D&D, you're not swinging swords, you're rolling dice. In Alice is Missing, you're texting, and so is your character. You're physically taking the action of your character in the story. That's about as true to life as a role-playing game can get. That means that on top of this sensitive subject matter, the actual gameplay can cut deep quickly. And it did. Towards the end of the game, I noticed that one of the players started to drift out of character. They told jokes that referenced real life and stopped truly playing their character. Not in a disruptive way or anything, they didn't ruin anyone's fun, but it was noticeable. So, in the debrief, I asked them about it. They told me that they had to start doing that because it was getting too real for them. They were legitimately scared and had to try and make it lighter as a way to not get too freaked out. I was shocked by this. I was getting the unsettling vibes that the game was going for, but to nowhere near that extent. Maybe it was my background in RPGs that let me separate myself easier so that it didn't hit as hard, or maybe it was my background in life. When asking them about why it hit so hard, the main reason they said was because of the subject matter, which is understandable. But there was a moment in game where one player was mentioning being cornered by somebody with a knife. And the player that got freaked out reminded them to tone it down by referring to one of our safety tools, namely lines and veils. Lines are the things that are hard lines that won't get crossed in the game. They're just things that don't happen or aren't mentioned in the game. Veils are things that can be referenced but happen off-screen. In this instance, we had veiled gore and violence, as the game itself suggests. As this reminder came to our phones, I sent an out-of-character message to the group agreeing and had us move on past that scene. During our debrief, the players said that they thought the experience was neat and was glad they did it, but probably wouldn't want to do it again, which is fair. But I do think that without that safety tool, the experience for the player who was already a bit freaked out would have turned from uncomfortable but interested to downright unpleasant, maybe even bad. This experience taught me the value of safety tools firsthand. Having them pre-established and ready to deploy didn't hurt anyone's enjoyment of the game or stop the fun. It was just like hitting a bumper in bowling that set the ball back on track. It wasn't jarring like I was expecting, it was just a nudge back towards a direction where we were all comfortable. I'm realizing now that they aren't story stoppers, they're story empowerers. If everyone feels that there are rails to the story that make everyone feel comfortable, then they can feel free to explore in new directions with the knowledge that there are safety tools around to make sure nobody gets hurt. Honestly, safety tools might be the unsung hero in what makes a game like Alice is Missing so immersive. I'm not really trying to be preachy about safety tools here. I'm obviously not one to talk since I was kinda hand-wavy about them before. I just wanted to tell you where I was coming from on them, since I imagine there are others running games who feel the same way I did. I was worried it would be a mood killer or unnecessary to talk about with people I trusted, but after playing Alice is Missing, I'm going to make sure that safety tools are accessible to all players in every game I run from now on. Alice is Missing is a great game, and I'd highly recommend it. It's one of the major role-playing games on my journey to start playing new RPGs that aren't D&D, and I feel like I've learned a lot from it. If you want to follow my journey on exploring other TTRPGs, feel free to subscribe. I just read through Blades in the Dark and have a one-shot plan soon for that. I'm also playing in a Dungeon World game with Austin from Tabletop Bro. You can expect some videos on those experiences coming soon. Thanks so much for watching, and special thanks to my patrons for helping support the content I'm bringing to you. If you're interested in supporting the channel, I have a Patreon that gives you access to a Dungeons & Dragons supplement called the Codex of Contagion that reworks diseases in D&D. If that sounds cool to you, I encourage you to check it out. My name is DeHart. See you next time.
The world's an empty house with all of the lights on and no one around. When I came to the end of the runaway child at the town, what I wanted to get, but I found that it's true, you are what you do. I said I was going